Hi, I'm J.R. Fibonacci. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about financial privacy. This is a companion video to the blog Adjusting to Bureaucratic Imperialism. It's not a reading of the blog, as I often do. What I want to note is that we have a trend worldwide in local and central governments in which those governments are facing budgetary issues. It so happens that myself and many other people predicted this development, but it's kind of obvious as of now that governments that have really increasing deficits sometimes may be interested in increasing their revenues. And amongst the ways they increase their revenues are raising taxes, kind of the most obvious way. Also, increasing fines of existing fines, making new things subject to fines, making new regulations where people are required to do certain things in order to, say, sell a home. I give the example in the blog of Austin, Texas, where there is a new required step before selling a home. So that step involves hiring a government licensed inspector to make an inspection that was not required a few years ago. So there are new ways to generate revenue. In addition to everything involving governments generating revenue, there's also individuals and businesses that may become more aggressive in their claims, in their court litigation, or in their out-of-court collection proceedings. So, with the overall trend of things, where there's more and more controversy relating to assets and revenues, there's an increasing demand or an increasing interest among some people in protecting their assets and their revenues and sheltering their assets and their revenues. In some cases, not just having their finances be private, but even having certain aspects or parts of their financial life be secret. So, and that's legal in many jurisdictions in many ways. For there to be secrecy. Perhaps the most well-known international reference to that is Switzerland and some of the banking policies that Switzerland has maintained for a long time. But there's other countries that have varying degrees of secrecy or privacy or required exposure of information. And while most people kind of just presume that the most ethical thing is to expose one's information a lot, I am also hearing more and more concern about identity theft. And so people tend to recognize that exposure isn't necessarily ideal in general. There's a certain amount and a certain kind of exposure that people like to have, certain things documented and protected. And then, it's kind of an evolving thing as far as what methods will people use. I'm getting very general. The basic idea of the blog is that there are tax-exempt shelters there's no controversy about the fact that they're tax-exempt, that they're preferred by the tax codes of the United States, and many other nations have similar codes. So there are certain kinds of shelters that are legally protected, in some cases even secret, where assets and revenues can flow with a different set of implications. The tax liabilities or the exposure to a lawsuit would be reduced. So there's something called a limited liability company. Limited liability refers, of course, to the liability of the revenues and assets of that operation being limited, specifically limited. So it doesn't mean that a limited liability company has no liability. It's a very specific advantage that governments allow for those organizations over certain other forms of organizations. So you have tax-exempt shelters, you have organizations that have limited liability, there are tax-deferred or tax-preferred shelters. So there's this wide range of legal structures, and some of the legal structures that are available and of potentially greatest interest to people are not necessarily widely known. People may not know how easy it is to have tremendous advantages in terms of protecting or sheltering their revenues or assets. In the case of having actual secrecy, frankly, there's no absolute secrecy anyway. It's just like different degrees of security, different degrees of protection, different degrees of exposure, different degrees of exposure like to controversy. So a tax-exempt organization may, in 10 years, not qualify because the laws could change. I'm not saying that amendments won't be passed to any government in operation and that new laws won't be passed. I'm saying as of right now, there's a wide variety, and that people are increasingly interested in more sheltering, more protection, more caution, more privacy. And in some cases, again, secrecy is a little bit of a kind of a relative term, but to have a really high degree of exposure where, like on Facebook, for instance, I may change this, I haven't yet. I was told just don't put your entire birth date. It's bad policy to put your month, day, and year of your birthday on Facebook. You don't give your social security number out when you're at the grocery store. You have a certain amount of discretion that you maintain. So you could call that secrecy. You could say, okay, so you keep your social security number secret except for specific cases. Yeah, that's what I mean by secrecy. So it's more like privacy. But anyway, so it's all in a spectrum and a continuum. So as governments and litigants are more aggressive, people get more interested in sheltering and financial privacy. So I'm calling it financial privacy. I don't want to suggest that secrecy is a definitive or necessarily even favorable thing, but privacy, in other words, financial caution, is something that more and more people are interested in. There's different kinds of caution. There's the caution in terms of the investment choices that people make, but also just in how people organize their finances, what shelters, what structures they use, if any. And most people use very little caution and very little protection. They just expose everything in their own name, in their own social security number, and kind of have all of their finances all mixed up together, rather than in another kind of common contrast, the people may dedicate a certain amount of their finances in their estate planning. They may dedicate certain assets to their descendants, to their heirs, or to a charity that they are inspired to support. So that gives you an idea of some of the detail, and to a certain extent I have generalized and added to what's in the blog, but you're welcome to look at the blog as well if you'd like. I have some examples about governments cutting back their programs of road maintenance and the implications for that on the businesses and people who might wish to travel that road, as well as the businesses that are located on that road. So it's not a major highway, but those kinds of adjustments are being made as governments face big deficits. So this is a really big situation, a really big shift underway, and so I encourage people to consider a financial privacy conversation or consultation, and you can contact me if you're interested in that. Thank you.